that were associated with concepts were adopted as written characters.
Ah, I see.
That idea is supported in China and Tibet by a little tribe called the Na-Ki, who have the world. They preserve the world's last surviving hieroglyphic language, and it's known for certain that the language was originally developed to express concepts of cosmology, and they use many of the same symbols. And based on my knowledge of Egyptian hieroglyphs, I'm able to predict what those certain symbols are going to mean in the Chinese language and which words are going to appear in.
It's a kind of a universal Rosetta Stone that you have discovered here in one sense, then, right?
Yes, but it's the comparisons that where the value are, and the comparisons depend on a recognition of the fact that these different systems fundamentally match. They came from something that was the same. Now, from the standpoint of many researchers, the reason we have pyramids in Egypt and pyramids in South America is because of something. A tendency of societies when they reach a certain stage and have the same materials to work with, that they develop similar forms. Mm. They're saying there's no system here. It's just natural that if you have stone to work with, you're going to create stone blocks, and eventually you're going to stack them up in the form of a pyramid. And my answer to that is that's true. However, in Egypt and in South America, you have a very complicated symbolism associated with a pile of stones that matches.
Yeah.
For example, the four faces of the pyramids relate to the same four constellations, and those constellations were used to control the agricultural cycle. Now, there's nothing about stacking stones that would compel that to happen. And so it's a symbolism that demonstrates for us that there must have been a common system here. Otherwise, it's not credible that both cultures would have come up with the same symbolism for the same form.
Some of the architecture, if we look at that of the Dogon people, is it's very interesting, and it's in its own way unique. It has obviously again its similarities there, but for instance, we can even look at the Dogon granary that you mentioned a couple of times now in that sense, and that to me looks like similarities even to Egyptian obelisk. Actually, what can you say about that, Laird?
Yes, that's true. The symbolism is very complicated because it has many different facets and levels. And whoever put the cosmological plan or the civilizing plan together provided us with certain reference points to guide ourselves by so that we know when we see a given shape or a given symbol, which aspect of the cosmology is being spoken about. Mm. Now, for example, you're familiar with the progression water, fire, wind, and earth.
Sure, the elements, yeah.
Now, within the cosmology, there are many different four-stage progressions here, and there's a reason for there being four-stage progressions, but many different four-stage progressions that are presented in different ways to give us a point of reference as to where we are in a creative process. For one of these, for the Dogon, is a series of animal forms going again from insects to fish to four-legged animals to birds. Now, based on that progression, we can predict that in Egypt, the god or goddess who's associated with the very first stage of creation, the god who is associated with non-existence coming into existence, will be an insect. Mm. And in Egypt, it's Keper, the dung beetle. We also know that we can predict that the god or goddess who's associated with the final stage of creation, which is expressed in terms of the formation of a word, in Egypt, that's the god Thoth, who happens to be bird-headed. And so by seeing the head of the animal on the Egyptian god, we can ask ourselves, what type of animal is this? And place his or her mythological role or role in creation at the proper spot along the continuum of these four steps.
I see.
Now, they've done this over and over again, and they said one involves four stages of development of a goose from an egg, and another one involves four stages of the growth of a plant. And so as you go along, and you see a given reference or a textual statement, and they mention one of these key references, not only do you know which theme of the cosmology are they talking about, because each of these four-stage progressions relates to a theme, but you also know where in that theme you are.
Mm.
So if you come to Anubis, who is a dog, or is there's a jackal character, the jackal who's the symbol of disorder, you know, based on our animal progressions, that's got to be the third stage, the four-legged animal stage of the creative process.
That's interesting. So we can see correlations here again between the Egyptian system and things like that. And I know that Robert Bouval right now is writing about the people of Nabta Playa as one thing, and then we have the Dogon up in northwest of Africa. Do you think that they could be in some way have been responsible in terms of the Egyptian high culture in that sense, but then eventually retreated back to their own region, so to speak, or have they do you think that they've kept to themselves pretty much in the area where they're at right now?
It is possible that the Dogon are related to Nabta Playa. The Dogon say that their cultural memory is that they came from a very large lake far to the east. And so it's possible that they came from Nabta Playa. However, around 3500 BC, it was a fairly common occurrence for little priestly groups to deliberately either be sent out or choose to go out and relocate themselves away from the main group. It's the function is about like I compare it to making a backup copy of something important to you on your computer. Mm. These groups were sent out, charged with finding an inhospitable environment, someplace out of the ordinary, out of the way, where they could live and not be interfered with, and where the tradition that they practiced had the best opportunity to be preserved. And so the Dogon have done this. They located themselves in a spot that is very, very difficult to get to. The Naki in China and Tibet live on the border of Tibet and China in an extremely inhospitable location. Even the Hopi Indians do the same thing. They have a tradition of priestly groups setting out to deliberately locate themselves in an inhospitable place.
And again, this has to do with the preservation of their culture and the way of life then, because to me that also implies that they knew that there was going to be a lot of other people, so to speak, coming on the planet and potentially threatening.
Well, yes. Well, they knew that the natural progression of a society is going to eventually dilute a religious tradition.
Yeah. So all these different people you mentioned, Naki, Hopi, we're talking about the Dogon, and eventually, way back we had the Egyptians as well. Do you see in regard that these the knowledge that these people carry are going to be widely dispersed again, into the main culture of the planet, so to speak, in that sense, or do you see that things are it's being more and more diluted all the time? What do you think, Laird?
It's a little of both. There are forces working in both directions. I can see that from a scientific standpoint, this cosmology includes information that our scientists are just on the cusp of discovering, or there are still a few hints and clues available in the cosmology that could save us effort. I think the original idea was that as we progressed as civilized beings, that after a few hundred or a few thousand years, we would notice that our religious tradition was really a mirror of the scientific tradition. Back in that day, religion and science were the same thing. But that we would recognize that there were commonalities here, and then all we would have to do is follow the religion to find the clue to the next scientific piece we were looking for.
No,
and somewhere along the line, we lost that. That never really happened. We got sidetracked, and just now, as we're noticing that these things are the same, there's still the possibility. For example, scientists are trying to decide among 200,000 possible shapes what the Calabi-Yau space looks like. This is